Welcome everybody to GoLocal Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. Before we go to Professor Lawless, a couple of quick updates. If you haven't seen it, an interesting split in the Northeast. The governor of New Jersey is closing or not allowing the opening of indoor dining. New York is moving in that direction. But here in Rhode Island, not only have we had indoor dining, but we're going to be expanding indoor dining. That starts today, although the state has not issued any guidance on how that expansion takes place. So an interesting split as the coronavirus continues to excel around the United States. Let's now go to Dr. Jennifer Lawless, our favorite professor at the University of Virginia. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
You don't quite make $20 million a class like Jennifer Lawrence does, but nearly that amount down at the University of Virginia, correct?
Very close, very close.
Very close. Let's go to some of the national politics. First and foremost, reports now coming out, first I think reported by the New York Times, of concerns by the US military and security analysts about a plot hatched by the Russians to put really hit squads in Afghanistan on US troops, literally bounties on troops' heads. That seems to become the latest controversy in how, not only the controversy related to the Russians doing it, but how the White House responded and how the White House is now cleaning up the mess regarding the response.
Right, there are several open questions. The first is, what did the president know? The second is, when did he find out about it? The third is, assuming that this intelligence is accurate and everything suggests that it is, why did he then invite Putin to the G8 summit after that happened? And why was Congress entirely in the dark? And so we see Democrats already calling for inquiries and hearings. We see Republicans asking questions and saying we need to find answers before there's a recess for the 4th of July weekend. So I think across the board, Capitol Hill is generally stunned, and the White House is scrambling to try and put together a coherent statement to make it seem like the president knew what was going on and still didn't respond to it or react the way that we would expect.
Listen, the president gets briefed on numerous issues and numerous threats around the world. Those are in a briefing that takes place every day. It could be in the book or a daily briefing, depending on which president and what their preferences are. So the fact that they got a briefing is not unusual. Whether or not they took it seriously may be up for debate. But the explanations that are now taking place has got to worry conscientious American Republican U.S. senators.
Oh, I think so, because it's hard to imagine any scenario by which a president wouldn't take seriously the idea that U.S. troops' lives are being threatened specifically, right? So this isn't the general overall nature of a terrorist attack. It's not intelligence suggesting that there might be something going on in X place on X day. This was far more specific information. And if the president's preferences are to not receive a thick daily briefing book and instead to be given a summary of the most important threats, it's hard to imagine that this would not have made that list. And so Republicans are caught between a rock and a hard place, because we know that they try to support this president, but given the political uncertainty in this context to begin with, the idea that U.S. troops' lives were at risk this way, that the White House knew about it and that they did nothing about it, puts the Republican Party in a really difficult situation.
Republicans seem to begin to split from the president on the coronavirus. Mitch McConnell made a very public show of wearing a mask and urging Americans to wear masks to combat the spread of the virus. Even Vice President Pence made comments encouraging people to wear masks and has been seen more often publicly wearing a mask. Red states, Florida, Texas, Arizona, etc., are exploding with new cases. Houston's ICUs are at 97% full as of yesterday, some related to the coronavirus, some not related to the coronavirus. We have a public health emergency across the United States. Does the president need to rethink his strategy on the coronavirus rather quickly before he begins to lose red states?
Of course, but he won't because he doubles down on everything. He is a president who, for the last 3.5 years, or actually longer because it was during the campaign as well, is unwilling to admit that he was wrong and is unwilling to apologize. The closest he got in any case to saying that he did something that was not right was the Billy Bush Access Hollywood tape. On every other indicator, he doubles down and he makes it worse. And so I read just today that he will be with Kristi Noem in South Dakota at Mount Rushmore for a very, very large, several thousand person 4th of July event. And she stated this morning that although they'll be handing out masks, they're optional. And this is an event that will have no social distancing. And so, again, this is a situation where even Fox News this morning called for the president to wear a mask because it would send an important signal to the US people. Unless he's going to do it, there are going to be thousands of people across this country in various states, many of which are becoming hotspots, who think that, well, if the president doesn't have to wear a mask, this is just a Democratic conspiracy. I don't have to wear one either. And we're seeing that that's not the case. We're seeing Republican governors and Republican mayors put into place measures to respond to the public health crisis in their localities. But it would be much easier for everybody if the president did it. It's just not in his character to do it, though.
He's not the only elected official here in Rhode Island. It is a rare day after an error that Governor Raimondo makes an apology. I think there are two on record, one on the UHIP debacle and one on not wearing a mask at a protest. She did not apologize for not socially distancing or holding people's hands or hugging people, etc. But what the president has, while never apologizing, has always been very good at is dictating the news cycle and changing up what the issue is. If the issue was hot over here, he'd be attacking China on trade. If China on trade got settled down, he'd shift to something new. He seems to have lost that skill right now. He's no longer dictating the news cycle.
Right. And part of it, or a large part of it actually, is because we're still seeing 40,000 deaths a day in the United States due to this pandemic. And the
cases.
I'm sorry, cases.
Yeah.
And we're obviously seeing numbers that are higher than they were in March and in April when states were taking measures that shut them down. It's also difficult to change the news cycle when the European Union lists 15 countries where they're willing to welcome visitors, and the United States is not on that list. We are in a position unlike our allies. We're in a position unlike what people would have expected the United States to be in. And those circumstances and the fact that this is spreading like wildfire across the country means that apparently even the president's wag the dog tendencies have limits.
Does he need to immediately, clocks on the field, roll out a Marshall Plan type structure to deal with the coronavirus and take firm command of this thing? I know it has not been his tendency. It's been to defer to governors, allow governors to pick state by state. And in many cases, the governors have wanted that. Governors in the Northeast, despite claiming they were going to work on a cooperative regional basis, have not done so in any significant way. New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut a little bit, but the rest of the Northeast has been a free-for-all, with New Jersey curtailing restaurants yesterday, New York looking to curtail restaurants, and Rhode Island expanding indoor dining at restaurants.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. Like, there's this loose association, but the policies that go into effect obviously vary. We know that if Joe Biden becomes president, he has said that on day one there will be a national mask law. He will sign an executive order, and we also know that there will, if need be a national shutdown. Now, the extent to which governors are willing to cooperate with that varies, but at least the leadership from the top would make that case. If Donald Trump wanted to turn things around, there's no reason that he couldn't do that now, but I don't think he believes in it. I don't think that he believes that it's necessary to do it. So in this case, it's not only a doubling down, I think it's really a genuine conviction behind the idea that we just need to reopen this economy. And it doesn't matter whether 125,000 Americans' lives are the cost, or what that number will grow to. So he's also not surrounded by people that he takes sufficiently seriously. If you look at the people on that coronavirus task force, they're incredibly competent scientists and doctors who have done amazing things. It's hard to imagine a more qualified group of people sitting in a room and giving him advice. and he doesn't take it. So I just don't think he believes that it's the kind of threat that it actually is, and that the rest of the nation now sees it as.
Listen, with Mitch McConnell's looks like a pivot. Redfield and Fauci are going to be before the Senate today. Is it time for Congress to start taking actions in circumventing the White House for the purposes of public health? And is there any common ground between Democrats and Republicans at this late stage going into fall elections?
I think the common ground generally is the kinds of individual measures that people should be taking to curb the spread. So mask wearing and social distancing. You still see like some little brush fires within Congress where certain members don't want to wear a mask, or Nancy Pelosi has to actually order them to wear masks in a committee hearing if they're going to be heard. But generally speaking, it seems that there's broad consensus around the idea that while we're trying to figure out a systematic national response, the one thing that we know works are wearing masks, and people should do them. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that kind of statement moving forward. But as far as everything else is concerned, it's unclear that there's common ground, and the Republicans have to sort of subscribe to this idea that things are getting better, because otherwise they can't justify the fact that they're not willing to continue to provide economic relief to their citizens.
As the White House continues to seem to be losing its footing on more and more of a weekly basis, Joe Biden is somewhat invisible as well in responding to this. There are missives that are sent out from time to time, but we don't see Joe Biden exactly barnstorming across the United States in a train or even holding virtual realities in cities across the country. He's hunkered down, and they're not letting him out.
He's hunkered down, I think, for two reasons. The first is fundraising. He had an excellent month. June 30th ends this fundraising quarter, and he needs to demonstrate that he's able to raise the money that it takes to make it through November. So that's one reason. We're far enough out where this is still the time that he can focus on that. Another reason is that we're in a context right now where celebratory campaign events are sort of poor form. And one big way to juxtapose what Joe Biden stands for and his character to that of Donald Trump is to make it clear that this is not a time to be out there and encouraging people to be on the campaign trail, or enticing people to come to events where they might be inclined not to socially distance or compromise their ability to stay 6 feet apart. So it won't be like that forever. This summer, he's going to have lots of events, even if they're without audiences, but he's going to have to go around the country. But at this point, I think that juxtaposition is a smart move.
VP sweepstakes, who's leading this week?
I mean, it's still the same group. So Susan Rice, who now is acknowledging that she, in fact, has been vetted and that would be an honor. Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Val Demings, still the same crop of candidates. I think that within the next couple of weeks, we're going to know who the vice presidential candidate will be. But this has dragged on far longer than I would have expected. And I think that most people would have expected, given the idiosyncratic nature of this election cycle.
Is it possible that it is not one of those four?
I don't think so.
So you're betting firmly we can call Vegas this afternoon, put our money on one of those four?
Yeah, I'm not ready to put my money on which of the four, but I'm willing to put my money on among the four.
Among the four, who is your favorite? You will not be held to this. There's no punishment for getting this wrong, but how would you rank them 1 through 4?
So I have a tie at the top between Kamala Harris and Val Demings. I think that Kamala Harris has the personality and the character and the charisma that some people might think Joe Biden lacks. She also has national name recognition, and we know that she does a very, very good job on the campaign trail. When she launched her candidacy last summer, it ultimately fizzled, but she definitely had energy and enthusiasm behind her. Her problem, of course, is that some of her decisions as Attorney General in California will come under scrutiny, and during this Black Lives Matter context, it might not be worth it for the campaign to have to spend a lot of time defending or justifying those decisions, even though I think they can. Val Demings, on the other hand, is less well known, but she is also very dynamic. She's very, very smart. She was a huge She played a huge role in Trump's impeachment, and so she can get under his skin in a way that a lot of other candidates can't. So I think that both of them have the background and the energy behind them that would make it a really interesting pick.
And then Warren Rice.
So Warren, I think, is very, very appealing. Her two biggest liabilities are first her age, and second, she seems a lot younger than she is, but she's in her 70s.
Yep.
And second, although she is very, very progressive, I think that but has demonstrated, a willingness to sort of meet in the middle on a lot of these social policy issues and a lot of these fiscal policy issues. I think that there are independents that are still sort of like, I don't know. That wouldn't mean that they would vote for Donald Trump, but she might not bring them over the way that some of these other candidates would. And Susan Rice has an incredibly compelling background, but she's never held elected office. And I think we're at a point in time right now where holding federal office is really, really important.
Let's go to Black Lives Matters, police reform. Is that, as the Black Lives Matters protests still continue, not at the fever pitch that they were 2 or 3 weeks ago, but Congress seems to have lost interest in any major legislation. Are we going to see anything substantial past this Congress?
Probably not. And I think this will be a major issue that the Democrats highlight in their campaigns for the House, for the Senate, and Joe Biden for the presidency, because there's enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is a bad word, but there's certainly interest on the part of the U.S. population right now to really move forward with meaningful criminal justice reform and police reform. And it doesn't seem like that's going to go anywhere. The Republicans in the Senate are unwilling to, move it forward. And so the bill that they put forward was completely inadequate from the Democrats' perspective. So I think the Democrats have the upper hand on this one. Public opinion is on their side. If Joe Biden wins and if there's unified control, Democratic control of government, then this would likely be one of the first things that happens in the new Congress. If he doesn't win, then I think this is going to go down the same way that a lot of these school shootings, the results of a lot of these school shootings have, where there's general public opinion on the side of reform and just not the political will to get it done.
Tim Scott's Republican senator from South Carolina's stock has risen. He condemned the president for retweeting a tweet in which, in a video, an individual was caught yelling "white power." Almost immediately after Tim Scott raised the issue, the president deleted that retweet. Is he now a factor at a national level? And is he now a factor going forward for the Republican Party?
I mean, maybe he's a factor because he's the only black Republican in the Senate.
It's not like the Democrats have a carload either. So Ed Brooks and Tim Scott have held it up on for men in the United States Senate. The Democrats have elected a number of black women to the Senate and not a lot of black men to the Senate over the years as well.
Although I will say that in the House of Representatives, on the Democratic side, you're in 14 or 15%, and on the Republican side, you're at virtually zero. So, but yes, the Senate point is well taken. But he's basically the only high-ranking black elected official who has the president's ear. And so I think when something as obviously appalling as retweeting somebody chanting white power happens, if he calls for it to be taken down, he's probably going to be received differently than if Mitt Romney says something. But these are really, really easy cases. I'm not convinced that if it comes to meaningful reform that he's championing, that that's sufficient to bring the White House along.
Most polls have the president trailing between 8 and 14% right now. He is trailing in most of those key swing states that he won last time around. Are Democrats, like they generally tend to do, measuring the carpets and getting all excited months and months ahead of time, like they did 4 years ago and on numerous other elections, or are they focused?
I hope they're not measuring the drapes, because we see where that gets them. I think that last week's Democratic primaries in New York are a perfect reason for the Democrats to remain worried because their anointed candidates don't always win. We'll see what happens today in Colorado and Utah and Oklahoma as well, but generally speaking, it's up to the voters. And you need to give the voters a reason to vote for your candidate. And more importantly, at this point, given the power of partisanship, you need to give voters a reason to turn out. And if voters think that this is a foregone conclusion, they're going to stay home. And staying home in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan is probably what cost Hillary Clinton the election. So, I don't think that the Democrats are going, I hope that they're not going to be in a position this time around where they say, all right, the outcome is signed, sealed, and delivered. We're going to go to the beach.
What is the thing that Rhode Islanders need to know about the state of American politics? You get the last word, Professor.
Well, tonight's elections, I would say, will continue to tell us more about the extent to which a progressive wing of the party is able to disrupt the establishment. And the big example there will be the Democratic primary for Senate in Colorado, where John Hickenlooper, a former governor and presidential candidate, is the anointed candidate, has received the endorsements from all of the establishment politicians, and he's being challenged by Andrew Romanoff, who's run for office before and is challenging him on the left. Hickenlooper has outspent Romanoff. He's outpolling him, but it's far closer than would be a comfortable margin. So we'll see what happens.
All right, key bellwether. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. For everybody else, join us back at 12 noon for Dr. Fine. Very interesting research emerging about how the coronavirus is morphing and what the implications are that for the American and global response to the spread of the virus. Thanks, everyone, and please stay safe.
Thank you.